The laces on my left boot had snapped that morning. I noticed it while I was getting dressed in the dark, the bedroom still smelling of her lavender, and something warm underneath, something I could never name. I'd been meaning to buy new boots for probably 3 years. Dorothy had mentioned it twice. I'd said, yeah, I'll get to it. I didn't get to it. So I stood at her graveside in a brown pair of boots, held together with a piece of twine I'd found in the laundry cupboard, and a dark gray jacket that had last been worn to my brother's retirement dinner in 2019. The elbows were fine. The lining had started to separate at the left shoulder. I'd noticed it in the car, on the way to the church, and tucked it back in with my thumb. None of that mattered to me that day. What mattered was Dorothy. 51 years of her. The way she'd laughed at the news with her hand over her mouth. The crosswords she'd never finished, left folded on the kitchen bench with 3 clues still blank. The cup of tea she made every morning that was always slightly too strong. And how I'd drunk it without complaint for 5 decades because it was made by her hands. She died on a Tuesday in April. Pancreatic cancer. She was 68 years old. We hadn't had enough warning to say everything we needed to say, but we'd had enough time to hold hands, which I think was more important anyway. I am 71. My name is Leonard. This is what happened after I buried my wife. Our daughter is called Natasha. She is 43 years old, lives in a suburb of Melbourne. I've only visited twice, and has been married to a man named Stefan for 11 years. Stefan works in property development. He has a very firm handshake and strong opinions about wine. I had never disliked him. Exactly. There had just always been something in the way he looked around a room that made me feel like he was calculating the value of everything in it. Natasha is different from her mother and me. She always was. Dorothy and I were school teachers. She taught primary. I taught high school history. We lived in the same house in Ballarat for 37 years. We drove second-hand cars and had a vegetable garden and took our holidays on the New South Wales coast because we liked the drive. We were not wealthy people. Not in the way Stefan understood wealth. But we were never in want. We simply did not believe in spending money we hadn't earned yet, which is a philosophy Stefan found genuinely puzzling whenever it came up. At the wake, held at Natasha and Stefan's house in Melbourne because Natasha had insisted it was more practical, Stefan pulled me aside while people were still holding their plates of sandwiches. He put his arm around my shoulder. The gesture felt rehearsed. "Leonard," he said, "you're looking a bit rough around the edges, mate." I told him I'd just buried my wife. He laughed. It was a small laugh, the kind that fills awkward space. "No, I mean, look, I'm not criticizing, just. People notice these things. Your jacket. Those boots." He leaned in slightly. "Dorothy would have wanted you to look your best." I looked at him for a moment. I didn't say anything. He clapped my shoulder and walked off to refill his glass. I stood there holding a cup of tea that was not strong enough. And I thought about the twine in my boot. And I thought about Dorothy's handwriting in the margin of a crossword. And I did not cry, which surprised me because I had been crying on and off for 2 weeks. I didn't cry because something had shifted. Something quiet and cold. It got worse at dinner. Natasha had arranged for family to stay on for a meal after the wake cleared out. Her brother, our son, Patrick, had driven up from Geelong with his wife Robin and their 2 kids, a few cousins. Dorothy's sister June, who had flown in from Brisbane and had spent most of the afternoon holding my hand without saying very much, which was exactly right. We were around the table. Stefan had opened a bottle of red that he mentioned the price of. The children were at the small table in the kitchen. Someone told a story about Dorothy that made everyone laugh. Something about a school excursion and a runaway budgerigar, and for a few minutes the room felt like it used to feel. Then Stefan said, "So, Leonard, what's the plan?" I asked what he meant. "The house. You're not going to rattle around in that place in Ballarat on your own, surely." I said I hadn't thought that far ahead. I had buried my wife 4 hours ago. Right, he said, nodding like I'd confirmed something he'd already decided. But at some point, it's a big place for one person. And in that market, you'd do well. We could probably find you something smaller, more manageable. I've got contacts up there. Patrick was looking at his plate. Natasha said, Stefan, I'm just being practical. Stefan said, someone has to be. June put down her fork. She's 75 and spent 30 years as a nurse, and she has a way of looking at people that makes them aware of how much she has seen. She looked at Stefan that way. He didn't notice. It's a family home, I said. Dorothy and I built that garden for 20 years. Stefan smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind adults use on children who don't understand how money works yet. Gardens don't pay rates, Leonard. That was when I understood what the next chapter was going to look like. Dorothy had been the quiet engine of our life. People who knew us slightly probably thought I was the organized one, because I was the one who spoke more, who managed the social calendar, who knew where the car keys were. But Dorothy was the one who had understood, from the very beginning of our marriage, that security was something you built slowly, without fanfare, and then didn't talk about. She had never talked about it, not to me in any serious detail, not to the children. It was simply not in her nature to display what we had or didn't have. She bought her clothes from the same 3 shops she'd been going to for 20 years. She grew tomatoes. She drove a 2009 Corolla that she washed herself on Sunday afternoons. She clipped the supermarket catalog and planned meals around what was on special, not because she had to, but because it satisfied something in her. I knew she had been careful. I knew she had savings accounts that she managed with a spreadsheet I wasn't entirely across. We'd talked, vaguely, about superannuation. I knew we were comfortable. I did not know the specifics. 10 days after the funeral, I drove to the offices of our solicitor, a man named Barry Okafor, who had handled our affairs for 15 years and who had called me the week before to say there were some things we needed to discuss. I sat in the chair across from his desk. He slid a folder across to me. I looked at the number at the top of the first page, and I sat very still for a long time. Dorothy had been methodical and patient and entirely silent about money for 51 years of marriage. And what she had accumulated through careful investment, through a small inheritance from her own mother that she had never touched, through compound interest working quietly in the background of our ordinary life, was not what I expected. It was not what anyone would have expected. Looking at the Corolla, or the supermarket catalog, or the boots I'd held together with twine. She updated this 18 months ago, Barry said. After her diagnosis, he passed me a letter. Her handwriting. The crossword handwriting. Small and precise. Slightly cramped on the left side. I did not read it in his office. I folded it and put it in my breast pocket, and I thanked Barry, and I drove home and sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. The calls from Stefan started about 3 weeks after the funeral. Not calls to ask how I was managing. Calls framed as concern, but angled, always, toward the house. Just want to make sure you've thought it through. The market in Ballarat is actually really strong right now. It'd be a shame to miss the window. I've got a developer mate who's been looking at your street, actually. No pressure, just worth a conversation. Natasha rang separately, more gently, to say she was worried about me being alone up there. Which was fair. I was alone up there. But when I listened carefully, the worry had a specific shape. It was the shape of the house. Patrick rang to say he thought Stefan was out of line, and I should tell him to mind his own business. I appreciated that. In early June, about 6 weeks after Dorothy died, Natasha rang to say she and Stefan were coming up for the weekend to help me sort through some of Mum's things. I hadn't asked for help. I wasn't ready to sort through Dorothy's things. But I said yes, because she was my daughter, and she was grieving too. And I thought perhaps I'd misjudged Stefan's intentions. I had not misjudged Stefan's intentions. Saturday evening, after a day of careful, almost performative helpfulness, Stefan had fixed a door hinge, reorganized the garage, twice mentioned a property valuation he'd taken the liberty of requesting. He sat down at the dinner table with the look of a man who had decided it was time to be direct. "Leonard," he said, "I want to talk to you honestly." I said, "Go ahead. You're not in a financial position to maintain this place on a pension." "The rates alone." I said I wasn't on a pension. "Well, you know. What you've got coming in from super and whatever." "It's not." I said I was comfortable, thank you. He leaned forward. "Look, Dad." He had started calling me Dad sometime in the last month, which he had never done before. "I just don't want to see you struggling. We could set something up that'd work for everyone. You could move into something smaller. We could help manage the proceeds. Make sure it's invested properly. You'd have income, less stress. You'd manage the proceeds," I said. He blinked. "Well, we'd help. As a family." Natasha was looking at the wall. I looked at my son-in-law for a long moment. I thought about the comment at the wake. I thought about the patience in his smile, the kind reserved for people who don't understand money. I thought about Dorothy in Barry Okafor's office 18 months ago, sitting across that desk, quietly making sure that what she'd built would be protected. "I think I'd like to go to bed," I said. "We can talk more in the morning." We did not talk more in the morning. I made tea that was slightly too strong, the way Dorothy made it, and by the time they were up, I'd already decided a number of things. The letter, I read it properly, all the way through. The night after they left, sitting in the kitchen with the lamp on, and the house very quiet. Her voice was in every sentence. Not the voice she used in company, the careful, measured voice, but the one I knew practical, a little dry, occasionally funny in a way that crept up on you. She said she was sorry for not telling me more. She said she had been afraid that knowing the number would change something between us, make us into different people than the ones she loved. She said she had watched, over the years, what the knowledge of money did to people, how it made them restless, or anxious, or greedy, and she had not wanted that for us. What we had, she wrote, was worth more than what we had. She said she knew Natasha would be fine. She said she hoped Stefan would grow into a better man than he'd been. She said Patrick had his father's steadiness, which was the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. She said she had talked to Barry about the arrangements. She said she had been specific. She said, "You were never a failure, Leonard. Not for a single day. Anyone who saw our life and saw failure was looking at the wrong things." She said, "Now go somewhere we always talked about. Take your time. Buy yourself a decent pair of boots first." I laughed at that. Alone in the kitchen at 10:30 at night, I laughed. And then I cried. And then I made another cup of tea. Barry Okafor called the following week to walk me through the details of what Dorothy had put in place. She had been, as I said, specific. The house was mine. Entirely mine. No joint arrangements. No complications. She had also established a separate account in my name, transferred well before her death. So there was no ambiguity that would cover more than my needs for the remainder of my life. Should I live moderately, which I intended to do, there was a provision for Patrick and his children. There was a smaller provision for Natasha. There was nothing for Stefan to manage. Barry told me this in the neutral tone of a man who has delivered many pieces of financial news to many families, but I caught something around his eyes that might have been satisfaction. "She was very thorough," he said. "She was," I agreed. I didn't call Natasha and Stefan straight away. I thought about it, the phone call, what I'd say, what they'd say, but I found I didn't have the energy for it, or perhaps the appetite. There was something in me that had gone very quiet, and I needed to stay in that quietness for a while. What I did do, about 3 weeks later, was book a flight. Dorothy had always wanted to go to Tasmania. We'd said we'd do it properly. Take the Spirit of Tasmania across, hire a car, see the Huon Valley, go to Mona, drive down to the South Cape. We'd said this for 15 years. There had always been something else. School terms, when we were working. Then the grandchildren's schedules. Then, before we'd had time to run out of excuses, her diagnosis. I booked the crossing for July. A cabin. Not a seat. Because I was going to do it properly. I booked 2 weeks. I found a hire car that was not the cheapest option but was also not a luxury vehicle. Because I am still my father's son. And I bought a new pair of boots, solid, brown, good leather from a shop in the main street that I'd walked past 100 times and never gone into. I sat in the car outside the shop with the boot box on the passenger seat, and I talked to Dorothy for a while. Which I had been doing more than I expected to. I told her I'd finally got to it. The call with Natasha came in late July, after I'd returned from Tasmania. I'd seen the Huon Valley. I'd stood in front of a piece of art at Mona that I didn't understand, but stood in front of for a long time. I'd eaten a lot of good seafood and driven down roads I didn't know the names of, and talked to strangers in pub gardens about football and weather, which is the best kind of talking. I felt, not better exactly, but steadier. Like the ground was where I'd left it. Natasha rang on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was careful in the way it got when Stefan had briefed her. She asked how I was. I said I was well. She said she'd spoken to Barry. I said I imagined she had. There was a pause. Stefan's upset. I said I understood that. He feels like Mum didn't trust him. I thought about that for a moment. Your mother trusted the people she trusted for reasons, Tash. That's not a reflection on anyone. It's just who she was. He feels like we've been shut out. You haven't been shut out. You've been provided for. That's different. Another pause. Longer. He said some things at the wake, I said. About my jacket. About my boots. In front of people. She was quiet. He does that, I said. I don't think he always knows he does it. But he does. I heard her breathe. I know, she said, very quietly. I'm not angry at you, I said. I want to be clear about that. You're my daughter. You're grieving your mother. I love you, but I'm also not a man who needs to be managed. And I'd appreciate it if we could proceed on that understanding going forward. She cried a little. I listened. We talked for another 40 minutes about her mother, about a photo she'd found in a box, about something funny the grandchildren had done. By the time we hung up, something had shifted slightly toward right. Stefan and I have not spoken since July. I suspect we will, eventually. I don't carry anger toward him the way I might have once. He is a man who learned early that money was the measure of things. And I don't think anyone ever showed him clearly enough that it isn't. That's a sad way to live. Whether he changes is not something I have any control over. It's September now. Spring, which in Ballarat arrives tentatively, like it's still making up its mind. The tomatoes I planted in August are doing something promising. Dorothy always had the better instinct with vegetables, and I have killed a rosemary plant and 1 lot of silver beet in the past 2 months, and I'm taking it as part of the education. Patrick comes up with the family most weekends. His kids have started helping in the garden, which Dorothy would have loved. His eldest is 11 and has her grandmother's handwriting already, which makes my chest do something complicated every time I notice. June rings every Sunday from Brisbane. We have long conversations about nothing important. She always asks if I'm eating properly, and I always say yes, which is mostly true. I am not the same man I was in April, standing at a graveside with twine in his boot. I don't expect to be. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It's a geography to be learned. You find the roads. Slowly. You figure out where things are now. Some mornings I wake up and reach for her in the way I did for 50 years without thinking. And then I remember. And the remembering takes something out of me. But it takes less than it did. I am told this is normal. I believe it. The boots are good. I've worn them every day since I got back from Tasmania. Good leather softens with wear. They're beginning to fit the way boots should fit. Like they were made for you. Because they were. Dorothy knew what she was doing. She always did. That is perhaps the thing I understand most fully now. Looking back across the whole shape of our life together, she was quiet about the important things, because she understood that doing them well mattered far more than being seen to do them. Some people go through their whole lives performing their worth for an audience, wearing the right labels, driving the right cars, making sure everyone in the room knows what everything cost. And they will sometimes look at people like Dorothy, like us, and see nothing. That's not a failure of the person being looked at. That is a failure of imagination. A failure of understanding what actually holds a life together. It's not the suit. It's not the car. It's not the house that someone else wants to sell on your behalf. It is the crossword left on the kitchen bench. It is the tomatoes in the ground. It is 51 years of strong tea and quiet faithfulness, and a woman who knew exactly what she was building and never once needed you to applaud her for it. I have learned, late and slowly, what she already knew. That dignity is not something other people grant you. You don't lose it because someone makes a remark about your jacket at a funeral. It is either in you or it isn't. And it has nothing to do with what you're wearing. What we leave behind is not the balance of an account. It is how we made people feel on an ordinary Tuesday. Whether the house was full of warmth or whether it was full of performance. And the house, this house, with its garden and its crooked hinge that Stefan fixed, and the kitchen bench where the crosswords used to be, this house, is full of her still. I'm not going anywhere. I've thought a lot, in the months since Dorothy died, about what Stefan actually saw when he looked at me. An old man in a worn jacket, boots held together with twine, a house worth less than the cars in his driveway. He looked at all of that, and he made a calculation, the way he calculated everything. And the number he arrived at was small. What I've come to understand is that his calculation wasn't wrong because he was cruel, although the cruelty was real. It was wrong because he was measuring the wrong things. He had never learned, or perhaps had never been shown, that the life a person builds quietly, without performance, without an audience, is often the most solid life of all. Dorothy knew that. She knew it from the beginning. She grew tomatoes and drove an old Corolla and put money away with the patience of someone who understood that time, not display, is what makes something real. The consequence of how she lived was not luck. It was the direct result of 50 years of small, unglamorous decisions. Every year she didn't overspend. Every inheritance she didn't touch. Every morning she chose the ordinary life over the impressive one. Those choices stacked, quietly, into something that could not be undone by a remark at a wake or a weekend visit with an agenda. And the consequence of how Stefan lived, of measuring everything by its visible worth, of assuming that the people who didn't perform their value had none, was that he arrived at the end of that weekend having shown exactly who he was, to me, to Natasha, and to himself. What you do when you think someone has nothing is the truest thing about you. He thought, I had nothing. He showed me everything. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because I think it matters, and because I wasted some energy being angry before I understood it clearly. He is not a villain. He is a man who learned a particular set of lessons early and never had reason to question them. That's not nothing. That's actually quite sad. The world is full of people who were handed a ruler and told it measured worth, and who have spent their whole lives measuring, never stopping to ask whether the ruler is right. What I try to hold on to, what Dorothy's letter gave me, and what this strange, hard year has confirmed, is that integrity is not a reputation. It is not what other people think of you. It is the gap, or the absence of a gap, between who you are in public and who you are when no one is watching. Dorothy was the same person in both. She didn't need anyone to know what she'd built, because building it was enough. Living it was enough. I am not the same man I was in April. I am quieter in some ways, and I think more certain in others. I know what I have. I know what I lost, and what I carry forward. I know that the boots I bought in July have softened with wear, the way good things do, and that next spring I am going to Hobart again, on my own, and I am going to find a long road I haven't driven and follow it to the end. Dorothy would have liked that. She always understood that a life well lived isn't something you announce. It's something you just keep doing, one ordinary day at a time, until the days add up to something that doesn't need explaining.